Hello and welcome to another screencast. Today we're going to talk about part 2 for our development unit. This screen shows you what part 2 is going to have, these 5 things. So let's get started. Recap. So we're talking about social psychology, social development. And so we're looking at factors that affect how people are going to have social relationships later in their life. So that's the social development. So one way is that Bandura's experiment with the Bobo doll, where adults hit the Bobo doll and then children modeled the behavior and did the exact same thing. So that's one way that social behavior is affected. It's affected by modeling. Another way that social behavior is affected was described by Freud. If there's some sort of traumatic event when the child is very young, event could be repressed. It could go into the unconscious mind, and then it could come out in some other way in other behaviors later. So, for instance, you can think about Antoine Fisher. He was abandoned by his mom, and he was beaten by his step family, or sexually abused. So that came out in his anger issues in his later social relationships with his friends in the Navy. Okay, so that's a recap. What about new stuff? Another idea is that there are certain parenting styles that affect child's development. And Diana Baumrin described 3. She observed a bunch of parents, and she noticed that some of them were authoritarian, strict rules, strict obedience. That was the authoritarian parents. Then there were the permissive parents, no rules, no obedience, pampering the children, spoiling the children, giving them whatever they want. And then there were authoritative parents. These were parents that were demanding. They had some limits, they had some rules, they required some obedience, but they're also kind of flexible and responsive to the kids' needs. They tend to let kids participate in decision making with the family. What are we doing this weekend for fun? What are we going to have for dinner? How are we going to run things? So it's a little more democratic. And what Baumrin found out is that if you followed kids later in their life, how do they turn out? The authoritative parents tended to have kids who were more creative and independent and responsible. Sorry, not creative. More independent and responsible children. They had some guidance, but they were also allowed to make decisions on their own, and that made them more responsible later. Okay, another idea for your social development is something called attachment. Attachment is a bond of trust and comfort between a child and a caregiver. Doesn't always happen. Not all children develop a sense of attachment. So you have to think about, well, what creates this sense of attachment? One set of research was done by Harry Harlow. He researched monkeys, and he had monkeys with 2 potential mothers. They had no mother, and these were two fake mothers. One that just has a wire, this one over here, and it has a bottle that fed the monkey. The other fake mom is this very soft, comforting cloth mother. And what they found out for attachment was that the monkey did not attach to the mom that provided nourishment, the wire monkey with the bottle, but it attached to the mom that was comfortable, the one that was cozy and warm. So when we get to this question of how do infants form an attachment bond with a caregiver, Harlow's research was important because it showed that physical comfort and contact were super important. When the monkeys were taken away from it was a terry cloth, that was the cloth. When they were taken away from the terry cloth mother, they had a ton of anxiety. Main point, physical emotional comfort is extremely important to forming an attachment. So if you translate this to humans, The idea is that babies need to be held a lot. They need to be held and touched and comforted. That's the idea for humans. Another idea about attachment was research done by Conrad Lawrence. He had some goose eggs, and half the goose eggs hatched with their mom, and half of them hatched, and Conrad Lawrence was there with them. And both sets of baby geese immediately attached to either their mom or Conrad Lawrence. And so this was called imprinting, the process of forming an attachment early in life, like right away for the geese. For the geese, he found out it happened in a critical period. If it doesn't happen right away in the first day or two, then they don't form an attachment. So that was one of the main points there. With the critical period, certain things in human development, if they don't happen in the critical period, they might not happen at all. Attachment for geese, it had to happen in the first couple of days, and that was called imprinting. The geese ended up following around Conrad Lawrence for their whole childhood. Okay, there's also some research on attachment done by Mary Ainsworth. She did a study called The Strange Situation. The baby and the mom, this was like a 1-year-old baby, would come into a room like a waiting room at a doctor's office, and it had a bunch of toys. The kid could play for a little while with their mom. Then a stranger came in. Then the mom left, and then the mom comes back. And so the researchers were looking, how did the children react when the stranger came in, when the mom left? And they found out that there's two main ways that they react. One of the ways they consider to be a healthy, normal response because the baby had a good attachment. And the other way was kind of a response that the babies had because they did not have a good attachment. So they called them, before I tell you what they called them, they're kind of exploring this idea of stranger anxiety. Babies, when they're 8 months old, approximately 8 months, start to have fear of strangers. Prior to that, a 6-month-old, a 4-month-old baby, not that worried about strangers, but at 8 months, they tend to have stranger anxiety. So this strange situation experiment is about sort of exploring how the baby deals with that. So if they had a good attachment and they had a typical response, Ainsworth called it a secure attachment. And these kids would explore their environment, play with the toys. When their mom left, they would get a little upset, but then they would be comforted when she returned. In contrast with that, there was insecure attachment. These children did not play with the toys when their mom was there. When their mom left, they would get very upset. And then when their mom returned, they might not care at all, or they might not be comforted. So, Ainsworth actually describes insecure attachment. She broke it down into a couple of categories. So one was called anxious avoidant. These are the kids who just don't pay that much attention to their mom at all. They avoid her. They show little emotion when she leaves or when she comes back. The other kind was called anxious resistant. These kids show distress before the separation even happens. And then when the mom comes back, they're hard to comfort. So Ainsworth thought it was super important that parents form an attachment with their children. If they didn't, the kids could become withdrawn or frightened or scared of other people. So the main point of attachment is that bonds formed with caregivers will affect the child's bonds later in life, how the child will get along with kids in elementary school, how they will get along with kids in adulthood, how they get along with dating. So parents need to work at forming secure attachment. And the way that parents do that, there's lots of different suggestions, but one suggestion the research shows is that you need to respond to the kid's needs as much as you can as a parent that first year of life. When it's hungry, you need to feed it. When it's tired, you need to get it sleep. When it wants to be held, you hold it. So that would be the suggestion by the research on attachment, that you're doing everything you can to be there for your kid. Now, you don't have to do that their whole life. At some point, you can let up on that a little bit, but that first year is real important. Okay, final thing in this video we're going to talk about is temperament. This is not attachment. This is an idea that temperament will affect your social development later in life, but temperament is something you're born with. It's genetic, and it supposedly lasts your whole life. So how sensitive you are to sensory input, your emotional expressiveness, your energy level, activity level, and whether you are introverted or extroverted. There's a little bit of debate about exactly which of these are temperament and which of them last your whole life, but there is research that shows these things you're born with and they do last your whole life. Okay, so in summary, which of the things in this video have to do with nature and which of them have to do with nurture? Here's the list of how that works out. All right, that's the end. I hope you enjoyed it. Tune back in next time for part 3. And if you have any questions, see me in class.